Welcome to the channel. Today, we're exploring some unbelievable story. Stay tuned and let's dive in. I staggered out of bed, feeling like my brain was about to burst. When I got into the restroom, I hurriedly took some aspirin. My stomach felt like it was ready to revolt, so I stayed beside the bathroom for about 10 minutes. During that moment, everything came back to me. My name is Brian Richardson, and when I came from work yesterday, my beautiful wife Clara surprised me. She began by telling me that she loved me, but then confessed that she had been seeing another guy for the last year and was in love with him too. She described it as a simple gesture of care. The guy, who she refused to identify, had been in a terrible vehicle accident and his wife had died while he walked away unscathed. He felt really awful about this. Clara stated that she had just begun attempting to help him cope with his emotional agony and they had fallen in love. And, yeah, she confessed they had sex. Clara even agreed that occasionally the sex was excellent. Of course, during this horror of a talk, she persisted on loving me and would ultimately return to me. But as long as this guy needed her, she would be there for him. She told me that she would be there for both our children and myself. The guy was much younger than her, and she knew he'd ultimately move on, but for as long as he needed her, she wanted to be there for him. This was perhaps the worst nightmare a married guy could have. Stunned, I did what any male would do. I accused my wife of being a prostitute and hooker. Clara then unloaded on me. She informed me she was quite upset with my response. Clara had the arrogance to tell me that if I really loved her, I'd accept the situation. She said that in our wedding vows, I vowed to love, honor, and cherish her. Clara was clearly upset and unhappy with me. I was outraged, and to prevent from assaulting her, I began drinking and shouting. When I had cooled down a bit, I asked her how she would react if I found another lady. Clara said, "Who would want you?" She described me as an overweight middle-aged guy with thin hair. She also threatened me that if I attempted to divorce her, she would destroy me. I was furious and had no idea what I could or should do at the time. My brain was completely fried. I couldn't comprehend anything rationally. Perhaps not my best moment, but I continued to drink and anger at Clara. She packed a suitcase and stated that she was going to see her boyfriend till I calmed down and accepted the situation. I couldn't recall much after that. I sat on my bed, our bed, and decided to take stock. Clara was correct, I was middle-aged, my hair was thinning, and I had to accept that I was around 18 pounds overweight. I knew I couldn't change my age, but I could change my hairstyle and weight. But first, I needed to find out where my children were. It was Sunday morning, so they should be at home. A brief look around the home revealed that they weren't. So, where the heck did Clara keep them? I was going to contact her parents when I heard a vehicle come into the driveway. Clara's automobile was visible outside my window. I could see our kids exiting and headed toward the home. I greeted Clara at the front entrance. "Good. I see you're sober," she added with a sharp tone. "Where were the kids?" I questioned with a snap in my voice. "They were with me." "I couldn't very well leave the kids with you," she told me. "You didn't take them to your sex toys house, did you?" "Watch your language, Brian," she snapped once again. "They were already there," she remarked, as if it were perfectly normal. "My friend is a wonderfully kind person. You, on the other hand, were disgraceful yesterday." "Fair point about me," I conceded, "but why didn't you take the kids to your parents' place?" "They weren't home," Clara said as she passed me and headed upstairs. I followed her to our bedroom. "Are you here to stay, or are you going running back to your lover?" I questioned you. "Oh please, Brian, stop being so childish. I told you how things are going to be. I have no intention of arguing with you about it. The discussion is over, accept it or don't. That's your choice. Even though you're acting like an idiot, I still love you. And as I told you, when he no longer needs me, I'll be back full time. So what do we do now?" I was struggling to retain my calm. "Right now, I'm going to pack a few things because I'm going to spend a few days with my friend until you finally cool down and accept the situation." "What about the kids?" I figured that would embarrass her into remaining. It did not. "If you don't want to watch them, call my parents. I'm sure they will." Clara then packed an additional suitcase of clothing and departed. At this moment, my skull was about to burst. But I knew I had to hold it together for the kids. But I was not about to accept Clara's romance lying down. No respectable guy would. After Clara went, I checked on the children and inquired whether they had any homework. All three claimed they did. I instructed them to get to it immediately away. There was a lot of wailing and complaining until I told them that after they completed, we'd go to Grandpa and Grandma's home. They are Clara's parents. The kids all rejoiced. They like visiting there since Grandpa was assisting all three of my children in building go-karts. They'd been working on them off and on for months. The carts have to be near to completion. Clara's parents, Michael and Susan, resided on a tiny farm around 13 minutes away. They were both retired and Michael just enjoyed tinkering. In addition to farming, he enjoyed building and repairing things. He had a large workshop that he utilized for all of his projects, and they worked on the carts there when time allowed. I'd be willing to help. I'm a qualified dealer mechanic at the local Toyota dealership. It is the biggest dealership in the Metro Cross region. I wanted to speak with Clara's parents to determine whether they knew about her lover and, more importantly, who he was. I also wanted to hear their advice on what I should do. My parents resided 3 states away, and I had always had a terrific connection with them. I saw Michael and Susan as my surrogate mother and father. However, I was concerned that they would take Clara's side in this issue. That would completely damage our relationship. I walked from room to room, making sure the youngsters were completing their schoolwork, which they were. It was then that I realized how much my children were my pride and delight. Ethan was the oldest, and he was 14. Only the close family named him Ethan. We began doing so to minimize misunderstanding about whether Clara was speaking to her kid or me. He was an excellent football player, but he was too little to get a college scholarship. Isabel was a year younger and a normal adolescent. She enjoyed pushing the limits but was also an excellent student. Adam, the infant, was just 9. He detested being referred to as the baby, but Clara insisted on it. Adam was a pleasant accident. We hadn't planned on having any more children when Clara learned she was pregnant, but Adam had always been such a cheerful youngster that he was a delight to be around. While the kids worked upstairs, I got myself a cup of coffee and began making a list. I had a lot to accomplish, but I wasn't sure how much time I'd have. The first thing I did was phone my supervisor, Edward T. Scott, and explain my dilemma. I had been with the business since it was started 22 years ago, and Edward had been my employer for at least 14 years. If I may say so myself, I was one of the best technicians in the dealership. Edward listened to my story and was empathetic, as his son had gone through a difficult divorce a year previously. It had grown quite nasty, to the point that his son's ex-wife, Sophie, accused him of molesting their daughter. "Damn," I said. "That is one witch." "Tell me about it," Edward responded, clearly bitter. It was touch and go for about a week. We expected the police to arrest Christopher at any minute. These are the kinds of accusations that are devastating and almost impossible to disprove, and the police run scared every time a woman starts pointing the finger at a man. When Sophie told her mother that Christopher had molested her granddaughter, I think she thought that would be the final nail in Christopher's coffin. What I didn't know, Edward continued, was that she has an equal share of fairness. She immediately took her granddaughter out of preschool and took her to her general practitioner. Margaret had the doctor examine her granddaughter to determine if she had been molested. The doctor stated unequivocally that there was no way her granddaughter had been molested. Armed with that information, Margaret marched over to the police department and told them that if they pursued the charge. "Men, too," Edward said. "So if there is anything I can do to help you, let me know, Brian. If it's within my power to make it happen, I will." Since I had 10 personal days and 7 weeks of vacation time, I requested the next week off. Edward immediately agreed and, in fact, informed me that if I needed to take all of my personal days and vacation together, he'd arrange it for me, which is exactly what I did. "There's something else you can help me with," I stated. "I need the name of a good divorce lawyer if you know one." "That's easy," he replied. "Use the attorney my son used. He cleaned Sophie's clock. Christopher got primary custody of their daughter, gets to live in the house, and Sophie has to pay child support. His name is Jonathan Lawrence. I think I still have his number here somewhere." The uglier my son's divorce became, the more we corresponded via attorneys, and I began hearing Mr. Lawrence's name in my dream. Edward searched for nearly a minute before finding Jonathan Lawrence's card with the number. I phoned the attorney's office. I didn't anticipate anybody to be there on a Sunday, so I decided to leave a message. But I was in luck because not only was Mr. Lawrence there, but his secretary informed me that he had a cancellation. He'd meet me if I could get to the office in 28 minutes. I informed the kids that I had to go out for about an hour and behave. I quickly rushed into my vehicle and drove to Mr. Lawrence's office in 18 minutes. Jonathan Lawrence seemed to be in his early to mid-30s. He was a handsome guy, a couple of inches shorter than myself. He had deep blue eyes and a kind grin. I had no doubt Jonathan scored big with the women. "What can I do for you today?" Jonathan inquired after I had seated myself on a chair. "My wife told me yesterday that she is cheating on me with a younger man," I added, feeling embarrassed and angry. I summarized the previous day's events as succinctly as possible. Jonathan sat, taking notes while shaking his head. When I informed him that my wife claimed to still love me but planned to continue sleeping with the man, he stopped me. "Let me get this straight." Jonathan's eyes darkened slightly. "Your wife claims to love you, but is she going to continue banging this miserable lost soul?" My cheeks reddened with humiliation. I simply nodded. "Okay, go ahead," Jonathan said. I went on to add that Clara had been enraged with me when I refused to comply with her plan. I also acknowledged to calling her a prostitute and a hooker in a harsh manner. I mentioned that Clara laughed when I asked how she would react if I went out and got a lady. It was terribly difficult and humiliating to reveal that Clara dismissed me as a man and warned me that I'd never meet a lady who wanted me. Not only that, but she threatened to destroy me if I sought to divorce her. "Did she really say it to you?" Jonathan inquired incredulously. "No offense, Mr. Richardson, but your wife is either one of the most callous persons ever or she has some serious mental issues." "No offense taken," I sighed. "I think so myself." Then I described how, after our dispute yesterday, she left the kids to her lover's place, where they spent the night. Jonathan's head shot up briefly, and he grinned. Then he lowered his head and scribbled something. "Okay, now for the $62,000 question. What do you want to do?" Jonathan inquired, looking up and steepling his fingers. I pondered the question for a time and then said, "I can't live with the situation the way it is. I don't know if I can get past this, but for sure I don't want to get destroyed in a divorce and I don't want to lose my kids." Jonathan shook his head with pity. "That seems to be the new norm with women risking divorce due to their terrible conduct, but rest assured, I'm going to bust my buttocks to minimize the harm she can bring to you. If you divorce, you will retain at least 48% of your combined assets. I will tell you that the courts are unconcerned with adultery, so you may be required to pay alimony and child support." "Yes, that is a possibility, but that's why we have to strike now and strike hard," Jonathan stated as he read his papers. "Right now, your wife has abandoned your marital house, and worse, she took your children to her lover's place and left them unattended, which is a big no-no with some of the courts. You currently have custody of your children, and I think we can keep it that way. I'm going to try and get an emergency restraining order against your wife, which will allow you to remain in the house at least temporarily, and the longer you're there, the stronger your case gets for PRE." "Does your wife work?" Jonathan inquired. "Yes. Part-time at the hospital," I said. "Clara works a shift on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays." "How much does she make?" Jonathan inquired. I mentioned that she earned around $23,000 per year. I, on the other hand, earned around $78,000. "I have to ask a crucial question, and I want you to think hard about it," Jonathan continued, looking squarely at me. "Do you still love her? Do you want to try to work things out?" I lowered my head and gazed at the floor for a long time. When I glanced up, tears streamed down my cheeks. I nodded and said, "I love her, but I can't accept this situation as it is. She disrespected her spouse and violated her vows. I'm done with her. I just want a divorce." "Last question." Jonathan flipped a piece of paper on his pad to reveal a clean one. "As best you can, tell me what assets you guys have." I paused for a time, mentally listing all of our valuables. Then I mentioned that we have around $3,498 in our bank account. We also have $42,000 in a savings account and a $218,000 CD with interest. I also said that I have around $148,000 in my 401k. Clara had saved significantly less in a retirement plan from her full-time job at the hospital. Even though she hadn't worked as long as I had, I noted that the hospital's benefits package was normally superior to mine. Surprisingly, my work had a superior healthcare plan, so we utilized it for the family. I hesitated for a bit before mentioning that we had 2 automobiles registered in each of our names. We, of course, had a home. However, we had just purchased this property a few years earlier and had maxed out our loan. There was little equity in it. Okay, here's what I want you to do, Jonathan said, looking like he was ready for combat. The first thing is for you to go draw out 1/2 of what you have in savings, checking, and the CD. Then I want you to put that money into a separate account in your name only. I can't do anything with the CD because it's in both our names, I told him. I can't cash that in without Clara's signature. No problem, Jonathan responded as he started running figures through his calculator. Take $31,748 out of the savings account, then pay as many bills for your house as you can from the checking account. Cancel any joint credit cards you have and use the joint checking account to pay them off. Then apply for a new credit card in your name only. I still have a credit card that I got before we were married, I said. However, I don't use it much because our joint card gives us money back. Even better, Jonathan said, smiling. You won't have to apply for a new card. Jonathan swiftly scrolled a set of instructions on a paper and passed it to me. Right now, I want you to go out to my secretary and tell her to call Harrison Locks for you. You give them the address and have all the locks changed in your house. Then come back in here and I'll fill you in on our next steps. Miss Carlson instantly put Harrison Locks on the phone and I gave them the address. I was promised they'd be out about noon. I then walked back to Jonathan Lawrence's office. Jonathan had just gotten off the phone when I sat down. We are in luck, Jonathan said. According to the clerk, if I fax my paperwork in today, we'll be assigned Judge Thompson. Why is that lucky? I questioned, perplexed. He hates cheaters, Jonathan said with a grin. He's a traditional Bible Belt judge who despises cheating marriages, regardless of gender. Trust me, that works in our advantage. If he hadn't been available, I may have had to do a bit more tap dancing, but I'm certain we would have obtained what we wanted. However, Judge Thompson is a close friend of my father. I'm sure he won't be upset if I phone him at home. Jonathan stood up at that time and extended his hand to me. I shook it warmly. Before you head home, Jonathan instructed me, I want you to head out and get your bank stuff done. I'm going to prepare a petition for an emergency restraining order on your wife. She won't be permitted in your house or within 498 feet of you or your children. She's currently staying with her lover and we know she's left your kids with him. That should help greatly with the restraining order. Weeks or months later, the order might be kicked out, but by then. For the first time since Clara dropped her little bomb on me, I felt like I'd reclaimed my life and some of my dignity. The bank wasn't especially crowded, so I was able to swiftly get a cashier's check for my portion of the funds and shut our one shared credit card. They informed me there was a $535 balance on it. I paid off the debt in my bank account first, then paid the mortgage 2 months in advance. That cost another $2,598. There was not much money left in the bank account. With a cashier's check in hand, I proceeded down the street to another bank and established a checking and savings account in my name alone. After that, I went back home. When I arrived, I discovered the kids watching TV, so I put them into the vehicle. When we arrived at my in-laws' home, I spotted Michael coming around the corner from his workshop. He waved and walked back around the house. The youngsters piled out and followed their granddad. Susan welcomed me with a kiss on the cheek. Michael entered a minute later, washed his hands, and then walked out to welcome me. I'm sorry I have to tell you this, I said instantly. This is hard for me to say. I took a big breath and proceeded. Clara is having an affair, and I'm filing for a divorce. I don't believe you, Michael said fiercely. Clara is not my sort of gal. What evidence have you got? She told me, I whispered quietly as tears streamed down my cheeks. At that instant, the rear door opened and the children rushed in. "Please stay outside for a few minutes," I instructed the kids. "Why?" Ethan asked. "Because I'm telling you to," I said more forcefully than I intended. Ethan noticed the tears on my cheeks and turned quickly, pushing his brothers back out the door. "Did she tell you?" Susan inquired in astonishment. "Yes," I said confidently, "and a lot more." I then told the tale of the previous evening, including the bit when she was having sex, and it was enjoyable. I also told them how she told me if I divorced her, she'd ruin me, and how she didn't believe any other woman would want me. They were surprised, and Michael was furious. "I still don't believe it," Michael said. "I'm going to call her and put the call on speakerphone." After dialing his daughter's number and enabling the speaker, Michael placed the phone on the coffee table. "Hey, Daddy," Clara said cheerfully. "What can I do for you?" Michael said, "Brian is here right now," and then posed the question. "Are you having an affair?" After a lengthy silence, Clara said, "What did he say?" "He said you were having sex with another man and that you were in love with this guy." "It's complicated, Daddy," she said. "I'm trying to assist this guy. He went through a tremendous tragedy, and I'm trying to assist him." Michael's face became crimson red, and he questioned between clenched teeth, "Are you having sex with him or not?" "We've had sex," Clara said, "but I still adore Brian. I just cannot leave this guy right now. I also love him." Clara's father left me completely surprised. She had always been a daddy's girl, and I expected Michael to make excuses for her. "Clara," Michael's voice was strained at this point, "I never thought my daughter would become an immoral woman." "Daddy, please." Michael hit the disconnect button, and all he heard was dot. Susan proceeded to answer the phone when it rang again a few moments later. "Leave it alone," Michael said, but Susan grabbed it and attempted to respond anyhow. Michael snatched her phone and flung it on the fireplace. "I said, leave it alone," he yelled at his wife. She was stunned by her husband's rage and backed up. I was even more startled. The room became silent as Michael and Susan tried to digest what they had just learnt. Finally, Michael came up and embraced me. "Brian, I am really sorry. I honestly don't know what to say. I can't believe what our daughter has done to you. We will do whatever we can to assist you. I mean anything at all. We will be there for you and the children. I'll have Susan chat to our daughter later and let you know how it goes. Right now, I'm too furious to speak to her." After that, I had to leave so I could return to the home and wait for the locksmith. After putting the kids into my vehicle, I embraced Michael and Susan and offered them to dinner so we could chat about my situation. Isabel started crying on the way home. "Are you and Mom getting a divorce?" she inquired. "Where did you hear that?" I insisted. "Ethan said," she answered stubbornly. I snuck back into the house and listened. I figured it was something bad. I just didn't figure it was that. I sighed, realizing they had a right to know what was going on, but the next dilemma was how to inform my children about their mother without inflicting too much harm. Damn Clara. Her selfishness was harming the children. I bet she never considered it when she climbed into bed with her new guy. "Unfortunately, it seems that your mother and I will be getting divorced," I replied quietly. "But why?" Adam inquired as he began to weep. "Your mother has fallen in love with another man," I said simply. "Do you mean she's having sex with another man?" "I hate her," Isabel muttered between sobs. "Isabel, don't say that about your mother," I warned my daughter, but my words rang hollow since those were my exact sentiments right now. Clara roared into the driveway 10 minutes after the locksmith truck had departed. The locks had been changed, and it wasn't too soon. "You had to tell my parents, didn't you?" she said. "I'm sure you told them I'm a prostitute and a hooker." "I thought you loved me," Clara said. "Clara," I murmured regretfully. "I love you with all my heart, but I can never accept that you're going to screw another person, and you have no idea how much you wounded me when you told me that I was just an unattractive middle-aged guy who no other woman would ever want to be with. In essence, you said you were doing me a favor by sticking with me, your pity love. I can do without it. You did more than that, you also threatened to ruin me. Nonetheless, you dare to tell me you love me. Clara, you need to take a critical look at yourself. people that love one another do not behave like that. As for alerting your parents, I added, if you're so sure you're doing the right thing, it shouldn't matter if your parents find out. Clara looked stunned as I leveled my allegations against her. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say those things, she attempted to apologize. I was just angry at the moment because you called me a prostitute and a hooker. Truly, Clara, I said, to call your wife and your children's mother by such names. Shame on you. If you genuinely loved me, you would accept the circumstances. I am not abandoning you for him. I simply adore him and am trying to assist him. He's a lot younger than me and will ultimately move on. Clara, I responded, shaking my head slowly, if you're going to paraphrase our wedding vows, you should add the part where you swore to leave all others. To be clear, a married lady does not go out and offer her legs for young guys just because they are injured. Furthermore, I've accepted the fact that you're broken goods and I won't have you in my life anymore. As you said, accept it or don't. That's your decision. Clara turned red and seemed uncertain at that moment, then her eyes narrowed and the arrogance returned, and she was breathing hard, and I assumed she was trying to figure out her next argument for why I should accept this situation. At that moment, I wished to God that I had no feelings for her at all, but I did. Look, Brian, Clara began, using the same tone she used with the children when she wanted them to behave. Stop being an idiot. I'm your wife. You know me. I love you and I will come back to you when this man is well again. I was very sorry, but I'd had enough, my love for her had gone and been replaced by pure hate. No, Clara, I said. I don't know you. My wife, the mother of my children, was a kind and caring lady who would never cheat on me. You are someone I do not know. For all I know, this is simply one of many affairs you've had throughout the years. I'm no longer sure what I know about you. Who knows if you're always opening your legs for Tom, Dick, and Harry who are injured? Clara's eyes narrowed and her cheeks reddened. I could see she was agitated and ready to erupt. This is not an affair, and this is the first person that I've ever had sex with since we were married, she said. This man has been badly hurt, and I am going to help him whether you agree or not. Suit yourself, I said coldly. I do not want and will never tolerate this. Not only that, but since I no longer believe you, I want to have the kids' DNA tested to ensure that they are indeed my. You are a total a-hole. Clara spit at me. I see you intend to turn this into something very ugly, I continued, but remember what I told you would happen if you tried to divorce me. I'd rather die in poverty alone than be with a woman who has no morals. I murmured, gazing down from the porch at my wife. I shake my head. I could take little comfort in the fact that she was unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. I believe she had persuaded herself that she could have her cake and eat it, with no repercussions. The sheriff's car arrived about this time. The deputy stepped out of his vehicle and approached Clara. Are you Clara Richardson? The deputy inquired. Yes, I am, Clara said, perplexed. This is a restraining order, said the deputy, handing her the court order. It says that you cannot go into that house and you have to stay 498 feet away. Do you understand? But it's my house. Clara sputtered. All my things are inside. I'll give you 13 minutes to gather your belongings, the deputy said, looking up at me. I nodded. Mr. Richardson will remain out here. Officer, I'd want to take my children out in the backyard, if that's okay. Just. But I want to see my kids. Clara was frantic now. The deputy was concerned that the matter was going to spiral out of control. The reason for the restraining order is to protect specifically your children from you. Clara turned around, wrath in her eyes. You did it. You want to take my children away from me. No, Clara, you did this, I said quietly. I simply informed the court that you had abandoned our house and left our children unattended at your lover's house where you were having sex with him. I did not forsake our home. And he is a fantastic dude. Clara yelled. He's just someone I'm trying to help by sleeping with him. If he's so amazing, why don't you go live with him? I said. Love him for the rest of your life. Or does he just want to utilize your glory hole for cheap thrills? I reacted mostly for the benefit of the deputy, not my wife. I brought the kids out the backyard and informed them that their mother was collecting her belongings to go to her new man's place, but I would let them see her before she went. I took no joy in Clara's encounter with the youngsters. When I brought them back out front, she burst into tears. Ethan ran into his mother's arms, sobbing loudly, and begged her not to go. "Please, Brian." Clara sobbed. "Don't you realize what you're doing to the children?" My anger flashed, but I fought it down and told her, with ice in my voice, "Don't talk about the kids. I haven't done anything to the kids. You were the one who took the kids out to your lover's house and forced them to stay there while you drilled your sex toy. Brian, why don't you realize that I can't leave him?" Clara said through tears. "Clara, I'm sure you thought long and hard before we had that shitty conversation yesterday. I told you. I understand that you cannot abandon him, so stay with him. You've already abandoned your husband, your kids, and your home. It's time we did the same to you. I guess in all of your thought processes you never considered the consequences of your decision. Now you're beginning to see those consequences. I hope you're happy." Ethan just stood there, gazing at his mother, and questioned, why. Clara stumbled about, attempting to explain what she was doing to her kid. Ethan listened, but it was evident he didn't believe anything. However, it was Isabel who really let her mother have it. "You are nothing but a selfish witch," she muttered, then spit in her mother's face. I had to grab my kid because I was concerned she might strike Clara. I also requested her apologize. Isabel absolutely refused. Clara was completely caught off guard and collapsed on the ground, weeping. I wasn't entirely surprised by my daughter's actions. Isabel and Clara had been having a difficult time recently and seemed to be more at odds. To me, it looked like the typical adolescent rebellious time that Isabel would overcome, but now I could only hope Clara hadn't irrevocably harmed her connection with her daughter. Clara jumped up and raced to her vehicle as I held Isabel. As she drove away, I could see her frantically hitting the steering wheel. I attempted to rush after the vehicle, shouting, "Mommy, please don't leave us." Ethan eventually apprehended him and brought him back. The deputy glanced at me with sadness. "Mr. Richardson, I am very sorry for what you are going through. Michael and Susan visited us for supper that night. I was about to grill some hamburgers and cook some salad when Susan hurried me out of the kitchen and served me bread and her world-famous macaroni and cheese. The kids adored it. While Susan was cooking, Michael and I relaxed in the living room with a few drinks. I could see he was disturbed over what his daughter was doing. I spoke to him about the restraining order and how I obtained it after Clara left the children unsupervised at her lover's house. That saddened Michael even more. "Well, Susan spoke to Clara about an hour after you left," Michael eventually replied. "How did it go?" I inquired, hoping. "Terrible," Michael conceded. "Susan attempted to reason with Clara to no effect. Clara is confident she is correct and we are all wrong. She believes we are nasty people." Susan became really furious at this point. I've never seen her so angry before. Susan finished the discussion by telling her daughter not to call us again. Susan also assured Clara that if it ever came to court, she would testify against her. As you can anticipate, the supper was extremely somber. The only bright light was when Michael asked the youngsters over to work on their go-karts the next day. At the very least, that made Ethan and Adam grin. Isabel simply sat there, furious off. She didn't eat anything, so I decided to let it go. I believe she was suffering nearly as much as I was. The next Saturday, Clara was served with divorce papers in the hospital. Friends who worked there told me Clara had completely lost it. Apparently, she was really upset with me. She yelled at the process server, vowing to destroy me. Finally, they returned her home, or more specifically, to her lover's house. Clara then hired her own counsel. Her attorney was a lady Jonathan was familiar with, having confronted her numerous times. Her name was Victoria Collins, and Jonathan stated she wasn't quite as talented as she imagined. Amber quickly attempted to get the restraining order lifted. Judge Thompson wasn't sympathetic. He said that the children were completely secure at the time and that he would merely amend the order. He informed Clara that she may come to the home for supervised visits, but her boyfriend could not be within 498 feet of the residence at any time. He cautioned her that if she broke the ban, she would lose her visiting privileges. Clara was thrilled with the change. Personally, I was not unhappy because I wanted the children to see their mother. However, Clara's elation was fleeting. The court then ordered Clara to begin paying child support, and the amount he determined meant that she would have to return to work full-time. Despite her outburst at the hospital, I knew they would hire her full-time since there was usually a scarcity of nurses. Besides, she was an outstanding nurse. The DNA results were sent sometime after the hearing. It took me almost half a day to get the confidence to open the mail. When I finally opened it and read the report, my heart was flooded with genuine joy. For the first time since this disaster began, my children were completely mine. I studied the report multiple times to check that I was the biological father of my children. Then I thought what I would have done if the report revealed that one or more of my children were not mine. In a moment of clarity, I recognized that I will always love them the same way. I even considered that, for the sake of my children, I would be prepared to forgive anything if Clara would only leave that guy and return home. The response was no. She wouldn't be able to instill good morals in my children. She was a horrible influence, therefore I needed to keep her away from them. I used up all of my personal days and vacation time so I could remain at home with the kids. When it ran out, luckily, Clara's parents agreed to watch them. Michael and Susan continued to refuse to speak to their daughter until she regained consciousness. Michael stated she phoned 3 or 4 times each day for roughly a week before blocking her number. Clara and I were responsible for arranging the visiting schedule. Actually, it meant that our lawyers would transmit our wishes. Finally, it was decided that Clara might pay a visit on Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday between 6 and 7 p.m. Susan offered to oversee. However, I insisted on being there for the initial visit. I wanted Clara and Susan to know exactly what the regulations were. On the first Tuesday, a vehicle parked on the street, and Clara got out. I didn't recognize the automobile but immediately recognized it was her lover's. Clara approached the home uneasily and smiled shyly at us both. "Hello, Brian. How are you?" "Susan, it's good to see you." "Clara, you have to leave," I was saying. "The judge told you that your lover wasn't allowed within 498 feet of this house." Her expression became horrified. But he was just dropping me off." "Clara, are you brain dead or not?" I was outraged. The judge was quite explicit. "There's no sweetheart here. Tell that a-hole to go immediately, and I will not inform the judge." Clara hurriedly nodded her head and went to the vehicle. I moved out at an angle, got a pen from my pocket while Clara was chatting to her boyfriend, and scribbled down the license plate number before returning to the porch as the car drove away. "Okay," Clara responded, "he'll come back and pick me up." I was done with her facades. I didn't have the tolerance for them anymore. Clara's expression was filled with rage. "Ron, I'm really tired of how you're treating me. You didn't have to steal the money from our checking account or cancel my credit card," she told me. "Clara, I didn't steal anything," I said. "The money taken from the checking account was used to pay off the credit card and then 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to make sure the kids had somewhere to stay while we sorted out our problem. As for deleting the credit card, I didn't want to be saddled with any charges you could incur while out with your sweetheart." Clara's cheeks turned crimson, presumably from wrath and arrogance. "This is not an affair, and he isn't my lover, Ron," she said. "You're being an a-hole." Before I could say anything, Susan came up and smacked Clara across the face, leaving me as surprised as Clara. Clara took a step back, gazing at her mother in bewilderment. "Mother?" she started, puzzled. "Clara, if you ever disrespect Ron again, I will tear that dress off you and beat your bum red," Susan stated with a growl. "Now, if you want to see the kids, they are in the living room. I want a word with Ron, and then I'll be in. But be forewarned, if you do or say anything wrong, I will bodily throw you out of this house." Clara bowed meekly and entered. "Ron, I apologize for my brain-dead daughter," Susan replied compassionately. "Thanks for sticking up for me," I murmured gratefully, and then I departed. The restraining order was removed 2 weeks after the initial hearing, as Jonathan said. But by that point, I'd established myself as the major caretaker, and I was permitted to stay in the home. Clara's child support remained in place while she continued to see her boyfriend, but she could now enjoy unsupervised visits with the children in public. However, the judge reminded her that she couldn't take them to her lover's residence and he couldn't be with her while she had the children. After 4 months of waiting, our first actual day in court to complete the divorce arrived. Before either of our lawyers could say anything, Judge Thompson inquired if Clara or I had attended any therapy. The 2 lawyers confessed there had been none, so the court ordered 8 sessions of marriage therapy. Neither Clara nor I opposed the sessions. I believed they were a waste of time, but I didn't want to upset the judge. On the other hand, I couldn't help but feel Clara was still certain that she could persuade me, or even the therapist, that what she was doing was correct. The initial consultation with the therapist, Dr. Harris, was just what I expected. Clara spent the most of the hour attempting to explain why what she was doing was the Christian thing to do. I thought the therapist was going to swallow her teeth the first time Clara began her explanation. I think Clara's arrogance stunned Dr. Harris, and in the second week, he started carefully examining Clara's points. She asked Clara whether she felt it was fair for me to go out and start having sex with a lady. I shuddered, expecting an assault on my masculinity, but this time it wasn't going to happen. Clara did not respond immediately, but I didn't care what she said. During the months that the divorce went on, I made several modifications. I know that seems egotistical, but when the lady you love tells you that you're not good enough, you want to prove her wrong. So I took the leap and had hair transplant surgery. I didn't need much of it, but it still cost about $4,000. I debated whether to get the hair surgery. I wasn't sure if I wanted to put up with the taunting. However, I still had vacation time, so I went for it. According to my understanding of the operation, my hair was cut before plugs were taken from the rear of my head and placed in the front. I spent much of the first week at home. My children were perplexed by me and posed several questions. I merely informed them that it was a minor medical procedure. After around 12 days, I looked very much like my former self, and each week after that, my hair grew longer. After the operation was largely healed, I began an exercise program. I also began running. At first, I could barely walk about a half-mile before feeling my lungs burst and my legs collapse under me. I eventually got to the point where I could run 10 kilometers. I've also joined a gym. I adjusted the lunch and dinner menus in our family so that everyone ate healthier. The kids complained at first because I took off fast food, cookies, ice cream, pizza, and other bad items. However, I conducted some research on the internet and discovered several entertaining things to prepare. They enjoyed it when I surprised them with something new and tasty. Some of the concoctions failed miserably, but we laughed about it, threw them away, and made sandwiches instead. As it turned out, my children enjoyed assisting me in the kitchen. It became a true family affair. Aside from the anguish that Clara's treachery caused in my heart, I was starting to feel better about myself. In fact, the first day back at work, I received a significant ego boost. I returned to the office to see what they had planned for me, and Olivia, the receptionist, greeted me with an odd expression. I expected her to criticize my new hairstyle, but she didn't. "Welcome back, Brian," she chirped, as her eyes began to examine me. "There's something different about you." I reddened slightly. "Oh, I've been on a diet. I've lost 16 pounds. I want to lose maybe another 5. She laughs and nods. "It truly fits you. If I weren't married, I'd be all over you." "Thanks for the ego boost," I said, "but according to my wife, I'm just a middle-aged man with no sex appeal, so much so that she's found herself a lover." I tried making a joke out of it, but it fell flat. By now, everyone in the organization was aware of my situation. Olivia's vision was obscured by storm clouds. "Clara is an idiot," she said. "Either that or she's got a loose screw. Brian, you're a fantastic person, and there are lots of ladies out there who would love to have you. Don't let Clara get into your head." That was the greatest shot in the arm I'd had in months. I now felt less like a loser. I returned to the current moment and asked Clara again, "How would you react if I came home and told you I was sleeping with another woman?" As I indicated, I was expecting Clara to assault my manhood, but she didn't. I did see her looking at me on our initial encounter. I suppose she could no longer claim that I had thinning hair and was obese. That was another boost to my ego. Anyway, I simply sat in my chair and waited, as Clara seemed to be pondering about what to say. She couldn't possibly claim that I couldn't have another woman if she had another guy. I guess if he was trying to help that woman get over some tragedy, I'd be okay with it, Clara replied arrogantly. What if he told you that he loved this woman and that the sex was very good, was my response. I would accept it, Clara urged. However, he would have to assure me that the children and I would be taken care of. The discussion went on like way, with me attempting to persuade Clara that her perspective was ludicrous. But Clara refused to move. As I had anticipated, these sessions were just a waste of time. Clara was merely going to use them to persuade me that she was correct. That was not going to happen. And by this point, the immediate shock of Clara's actions had worn off. It's strange how if love isn't fostered, it starts to die. By the third week, everything had shifted. Clara entered the session quite somber and spoke nothing. Mostly, she listened. Whatever had happened had put Clara back a little. Perhaps she wasn't as arrogant now that I was gently and compassionately questioning her whole assumption at every turn. Clara also checked me out when she didn't expect me to notice. I continued to exercise and shed a couple more pounds. I'd even started doing a lot of yard work, which had resulted in a wonderful tan. A few months before the therapy sessions were scheduled, I made another shift. I was getting unhappy with my work. Oh, I like mending automobiles and not only the engines. I found great joy in performing bodywork. I had been repairing ancient automobiles since I was 13 years old. I could do it everything. Now, I see running my own company as a way to spend more time with my children. I discussed it with Michael and he agreed to assist. I wanted to open my own store and start a company, but I couldn't simply leave my work to do so. I didn't have enough money to support myself till the company could maintain us. We'd starve before I could make a go at it. However, since Michael's property was also in an industrial zone, he consented to allow me set up my company in his workshop. Michael's tinkering shop was formerly a horse barn that he had renovated. There was plenty of room for Michael and me if I got the company going. Michael agreed to lease me a plot of land on the road so that I could construct my own structure. I spent time at work examining how they put things up. The dealership was fundamentally set up to manage more business than I had anticipated. They completed some bodywork at the dealership, but most of it was substituted out. With this in mind, I reduced my tool and equipment requirements. One thing was certain: I needed to create a paint booth. Michael was not only all right with it, but even helped me build it. I used the cash I had released from our shared accounts, as well as a modest loan from Michael, to fund the enterprise. I began part-time, mostly working weekends and nights. It was entertaining, and the kids would come out often to watch or even assist. I really loved showing Ethan how to do things. Even Isabel got her hands filthy and enjoyed telling her pals about how she helped rebuild an engine or paint a Corvette. That made her more appealing to the lads at school. I acquired business by word of mouth, and I quickly wondered whether I shouldn't go full-time. That choice was solidified when I was informed that they required me to work over the weekend to cover some backup work. I couldn't do that since I had my own clients to take care of. I expected to be fired when I walked in to inform Edward that I couldn't work because I had personal business responsibilities. "Have you got a minute, Edward?" I inquired as I peered inside his office. "Sure, Brian," he said, waving me in. "I am delighted you are working this weekend. We'll have 42 sold autos arriving on Saturday that need to be thoroughly inspected. We need to get them out before the end of the month." I winced when he told me that. Most individuals are unaware that manufacturers provide particular incentives for dealerships. If they sell a particular number of automobiles in a month, they get a reduction on their invoice. For example, the manufacturer may offer, "If you sell 298 vehicles this month, we'll take $148 off your cost." That's a $43,000 savings that goes directly to the owner. However, if the dealer only sells 297, they get nothing. This was a significant deal for the dealership. "That's it, Edward," I murmured, and I could feel the perspiration running down my back. "I cannot work this weekend. I've established my own company on weekends, and I have a lot of work to accomplish." "I'm sorry, Brian," Edward remarked with a smile, "but if you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go." I understand, Edward, I said with resignation. I just hope there are no hard feelings. I've been trying to build up a business of my own. I want to spend more time with my kids and make a little extra money for their college funds. I'll clean out my locker. I hate to lose you, Brian, Edward said regretfully. Tell me about your business. Where are you located and what kind of jobs are you doing? I explained that I had set up my business on Michael's land and informed him about the equipment and supplies I had. In fact, I was equipped to undertake almost any kind of automobile repair, including bodywork. Go get yourself a cup of coffee and then come back here, Edward replied, reaching for his phone. I didn't want any coffee, so I went to my locker and put all my stuff in a box. Losing this job meant that it was going to be slim pickings for a while, and the kids would have to be put on Clara's health insurance plan, as I had taken her off mine. Still, I was confident that I could make it, and I was turning away almost as much business as I was accepting. When Edward spotted me going down the corridor, he waved for me to enter his office. I've got a deal for you, Brian, he said enthusiastically. If you'll work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for any money you lose because your customers are unhappy. No, I said, shaking my head. I couldn't do that to my customers, Edward. Hold your horses, Edward said. I'm not done. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an independent contractor's agreement. I really need you this weekend. I also think you can convince your customers to wait a few days. If you can do that and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to do some of our bodywork. I was stunned, but I took the deal, and after that weekend, I was basically working full-time at my business, occasionally going into the dealership if they had a problem and I wasn't busy. Michael started assisting me part-time, and Susan agreed to do my books, and I was now making more money than I ever had working for the dealership. My marriage was the only thing that was still wrong in my life, and after the 4th therapy session, I wanted to call it quits. I didn't care what Clara was doing with her new love. Oh, don't get me wrong, it still ached when I would stop and think about the fact that my wife was with another guy, I said, but I wasn't stopping as frequently. In our 6th session, I decided to go on offense. When Dr. Harris asked if I had anything to say, I decided to confront Clara about the most hurtful thing she had ever said to me, that I was basically too ugly to attract another woman. I figured that if I attacked Clara hard enough, she would decide to end these wasteful sessions. Clara, I've decided that you're not only a totally selfish person, but you're basically a very nasty person, I told you. How do you tell the man you supposedly love that he is an ugly middle-aged man who no woman would ever want? You hurt me in a way that I don't think I'll ever get over. Oh God, Brian, I'm so sorry, she cried out. I'm so ashamed that I ever said that. If I could take it back, I would. I do love you, just not enough to give up your lover. I said coldly, you will need it more than I do. Clara erupted into hysterical weeping, and no matter what I said, we couldn't quiet her down. Dr. Harris eventually put the session to a close, but given us homework to do before our next one, which I didn't look forward to since I'd decided these sessions were a complete waste of time. The assignment simply consisted of answering a number of questions, some of which I understood, such as how is our relationship with our parents and how was our sexual experience. Some of the questions didn't make sense to me, such as what are my favorite foods and beverages, or what kind of car do I drive. But the one question that really made me stop and ponder was, if you could alter one thing, what would it be? I had been working on this questionnaire the night after that last session, but I put it away after I read that question. The next day, I finally wrote that I wished I had been a better husband, so my wife wouldn't have stopped loving me. We turned the papers in at our next session, but Dr. Harris didn't even look at them. Instead, she started by asking if we had any questions or if there was anything we'd like to discuss. I'd like to ask Clara a question, I said quickly. Dr. Harris nodded, and I turned to look at my separated wife. Clara, I don't see that we are getting anywhere with these sessions. You've made it consistently clear that you're not going to leave your friend Matthew Brooks, and that leaves no chance for reconciliation. Why don't we just stop this and get the divorce done? How do you know his name? Clara inquired, shocked. The first time you came over to visit the kids, I got his license number, I said quietly. After that, it wasn't hard to find out his name. But it doesn't really matter. I have no interest in getting back at him or even talking to him. I just don't care anymore. I want to move on. Clara looked up at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. I hated seeing her in agony and I wanted to run over and embrace her, but I knew it wouldn't help, so I kept going. I know your lawyer hasn't been happy with the settlement I've offered so far. Well, I've told my attorney to offer some alternatives. I'm willing to give you more visitation to the kids. I'm also offering to pay you $1,000 a month in alimony for 3 years. I just want you out at any cost. Clara had made it perfectly clear to me that she was not going to stop seeing the guy, and I couldn't and wouldn't accept my wife having sex with another man. I couldn't understand how she could possibly think that I would be able to live with such a situation. At this point, it didn't matter, all I wanted was out, so I resolved to push to put a stop to this charade. I know that what you said about me was partially true. It did hurt like hell when you said it, and I did tell you that I didn't think I'd ever get over that, but as time goes on, I realize that I am getting over it anyway. I halted and stared at Clara, who remained mute. As you can see, I went on, I've tried to fix myself up. I don't think I'm the man you thought so little of when you took up with Jacob. I've also started dating. After we divorce, you can take care of your gentleman friend for as long as you want, but I think it's time to end this. If for no other reason, so you can start to rebuild a relationship with your kids. Clara broke into tears and exited the room, leaving me as startled as I had been when I first learned of her affair. Clara eventually gathered herself and informed me that she wanted to see Dr. Harris alone for the following session, followed by me alone for the last session. I agreed with a sigh. When Clara unloaded all of this on me, I was furious and filled with rage, but now, months later, I was simply exhausted. I could see the pain this was causing not only me, but Clara, her parents, and, most importantly, our children, and I wanted it to stop. I was also no longer furious that Clara was having sex with some guy. When I arrived for my final visit with Dr. Harris, I was relieved that Clara was not there, as well as that the therapy was coming to a close. Brian, I want to commend you for your restraint through all these sessions, the doctor said. I know this entire situation has been unbelievably painful for you. After meeting with Clara last week, I believe I now understand what happened to your wife. I was now perched on the tip of my chair, thinking, finally, maybe I'd figure out why Clara had chosen to end our marriage. Do you remember the homework I gave you? Dr. Harris said. I merely nodded. I had forgotten about it and assumed it had been of little use in these therapy sessions. The way you both answered one specific question astonished me, she continued as she took out 2 pieces of paper from her folder. The question was, if you could alter one thing, what would it be? I nodded. You answered that you wished you could have been a better husband, so your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you. Clara burst into tears when she heard it, and it took me a long time to calm her down. I had no idea what to think, say, or do, so I simply sat there. Brian, Dr. Harris said, your wife has never stopped loving you. That's why she keeps sleeping with Jacob, because she loves me so much, I remarked, giving Dr. Harris a disapproving look, before sighing. Brian, what I discovered about Clara was that she was going through a severe midlife crisis. As the children were getting older, Clara felt her life slipping away from her. She is, and I suspect she has always been, a warm and caring person. Somewhere along the line, she found Jacob, who needed her terribly. She confused her desire to be young again and Jacob's terrible need for forgiveness over his wife's death for love. That doesn't alter a thing, I said. She's still sleeping with Jacob. Actually, no, she's not, Brian. Really, the doctor said. Jacob left town the same day you told Clara that you were going to start dating and that you just wanted to get on with the divorce. She figured that she had already lost you. I considered it, but Dr. Harris was right, and it didn't change my mind. There had been too much said and done to go back. I had my life on track now, and I wanted to move forward. I would never be able to trust Clara again, and I didn't want to live like that. Aside from anything else, I wanted it so the kids could hopefully start bonding with their mother again. Isabel's grades had slipped badly since this whole mess had started, and I was sure that she was still. I'm not sure whether Ethan's response was worse than the 2 girls. He wasn't furious or morose, but whenever his mother's name came up in conversation, he quickly changed the topic. One last thing, Brian, Dr. Harris continued as she took out the second piece of paper. This is Clara's answer to the question about changing one thing. She left a message: if I could change one thing, it would be that I never met Matthew Brooks. After the divorce was finalized, Clara agreed to pay visits to the kids on Thursdays and Saturdays. I made it a point to take the kids out to dinner on Saturday before Clara arrived. At first, our interaction was formal and awkward, but we eventually began sharing meals with the kids. One evening, Clara asked if she could spend the night. No, I said while making a joke. The bed in the spare room isn't all that comfortable. It's better if you just go back to your place. And next time, never think that I would be in the same room alone with you. In the case of Matthew Brooks, his story appears to be not entirely true. His wife died in a car accident while driving away from him after she discovered him cheating on her. I believe he left town because of a severe beating he received outside a local bar: 5 broken ribs, 1 busted kneecap, 5 missing teeth, and 2 busted nuts. I had to call in a favor with some friends, but it was worth it. The beating will ensure. Clara, on the other hand, gradually regained a loving relationship with her children, or more accurately, with Isabel and Adam. Regardless of what Clara did, there always seemed to be a distance between her and Ethan. I would have expected Isabel to be the one who held a grudge, but she was the first to fully embrace her mother's return. Clara ultimately made peace with her parents. However, like Ethan, she had a minor chill with her father. Anyway, most Mondays, we'd eat supper there as a family, but we weren't. Clara continued telling me how sorry she was for everything that had occurred, until I urged her to stop. I will never forgive you, and it's useless to try. To conclude, I said to her, "Oh, please, Clara, stop being so childish. I told you how things are going to be. I have no intention of arguing with you about it. The discussion is over. Accept it or don't. That's your choice. We are never getting back together again. Even if you were the last woman on the planet and the fate of mankind depended on me making love to you. I'll pass." I married Isabel's teacher 3 years later. How we met and how it all went down is a tale for another time, but what counts is that the kids have moved on from her and welcomed her as a member of the family. Clara still hasn't embraced the fact that I've moved on, so I'm not going to do anything about it. The conversation was done, and she either accepts it or doesn't. Thank you for watching. Do you believe forgiveness was possible here? Please share your ideas in the comments and remember to like and subscribe.